back to the cartilaginous fishes, specifically the elasmobranchs, Rhizoprionodon, and Dasyatis. So you can see in their body form the relation of structure to function. Rhizoprionodon has a typical fish shape, fusiform or streamlined, adapted for rapid swimming because they are predaceous. While Dasyatis, the stingray, has a broad and flat form typical of bottom feeders that smoothly sail or hover on the ocean floor. They're sluggish. And then there are 3 paired sensory organs in the head region. So as you can remember, the Gnathostome body is divided into head, trunk, and tail, the 3 regions. And then within the head region, nandiyan yung mga 3 paired sensory organs, like a pair of eyes. And then if you follow the nostrils inside, you'll encounter the olfactory sacs, and then inside the skull is the internal ear apparatus. And then there's a mouth equipped with teeth, so may jaws sila. And then there are 5 external gill slits. Sharks typically have spiracles in addition to this 5 gill slits, but Rhizoprionodon, our specimen, has no spiracles. Aside from the unpaired fins, like the 2 dorsal fins here and the caudal fin, there are 2 pairs of lateral appendages in Gnathostomes. This is in contrast to jawless fishes na wala silang paired appendages. So you have pectoral and pelvic fins. The pelvic fin of male elasmobranchs are modified typically into a pair of claspers for internal fertilization. And then just posterior to the pelvic fin is an aperture, the cloacal aperture, which is a common chamber for urogenital and digestive products. The fin rays, the skeletal support of the fins, is of ceratotrichia type. The tail is asymmetric, heterocircle type. In the stingray, the pectoral fins are greatly expanded relative to the pelvic at saka dorsal fin, na reduce na lang into stumps on the tail. And the tail itself is whip-like in structure. There's also a nasofrontal process, basically a skin flap, which if you lift, you'll see the groove, the oronasal groove leading into the mouth. The 5 external gill slits of stingray are located on the ventral side, pero yung spiracle niya nasa dorsal side, adjacent to the eyes. The spiracle is the entryway of respiratory water into the pharynx, and then to the gills, and then out via the gill slits. And then we have the class Actinopterygia again, the rayfin fishes, specifically the ganoid fishes, so-called. And these so-called primitive bony fishes are covered with hard, shiny ganoid scales. So mga ganoid scales ang meron sila. With the exception of the paddlefish, they have lost their scales in their evolution. The tail is either difficircle, kagaya ng kay Polypterus, or heterocircle, kagaya ng kay sturgeon, garpike, although wala na dito sa specimen natin, and sa paddlefish, heterocircle din. All of these specimens also retain a pair of spiracles, although we cannot see in these pictures. As with most bony fish, they also have gill covers, operculum, a bony operculum. Pero kakaiba na naman yung si paddlefish, yung operculum niya is non-bony. So it's just a skin flap. And then its paddle, which is technically the rostrum, is specialized for food detection, equipped with electroreceptive cells as it feeds on plankton. And then the largest clade of vertebrates is the Teleost, with over 30,000 species already described. They are the typical bony fish exemplified by our tilapia. So their tail is symmetric, although in this specimen, hindi obvious, pero dito sa diagram, ganito yung itsura niya. So symmetric siya. Homocircle. The fin ray skeleton is Lepidotrichia type, made up of bone. Internal to the bony operculum is a branchiostegal membrane, supported by branchiostegal rays. So this is used to close the gill chamber and to maximize gas exchange during breathing. The actual gas exchange organs are the rows of gill filaments there. The gill lamellae are microscopic structures, so you can see them. They are located in each filament where gas exchange occurs. The gills are supported by the gill arches. Itong moon-shaped label na to. The gill arch. And then each gill arch, the inner margin nila, ay mayroong tooth-like structures that prevent large particles from entering and enduring the gills. Those are the gill rakers. The pelvic fin, ito, is anteriorly shifted in the case of Iuliis, and the pectoral fins are slightly moved upwards dorsally. So halos magkatabi na yung pelvic and the pectoral fins nila in contrast to the other fishes we've seen so far. This is the anal fin. Don't confuse it with the pelvic fin. And anterior to the anal fin, you'll see the urogenital and anal openings. So the Iuliis do not have a cloacal aperture or cloacal chamber. Instead, separate yung anus at saka urogenital opening. Oh, I think we can zoom in, see it better. So, yan. The anus is anterior to the urogenital opening. This is the reverse in mammals. And then in the case of female Iuliis, separate pa further yung urinary pore sa genital opening. So, bali may tatlo silang butas. And then, lateral line, yes. So, there's also a lateral line here running through the body of the fins. We can zoom in again. So, yung line na yan running along the side of the body of the fish. The lateral line contains canals leading into sensory hair cells that detect vibration underwater. So, the lateral line system is basically how fishes hear underwater. And then next, the scales of fishes are of dermal type. They are derived from the dermis. Elasmobranchs have placoid scales, which have spines. Mga spines. Ganito yung itsura niya. In the diagram, may spines sila and the basal plate na embedded in the skin. So, these are like tiny teeth, making the shark skin sandpapery in texture. The way placoid scales develop and its anatomy is very similar to the vertebrate teeth. So the placoid scales are believed to be the homologous to the vertebrate teeth. So one hypothesis is actually that the true teeth of gnathostomes, in contrast to the horny teeth of lamprey na nakita ninyo, originated from a bunch of anterior placoid scales and then nag-move lang sila sa mouth cavity, becoming the teeth. The primitive bony fishes have ganoid scales, as we saw. It's rhomboid in shape and is covered with hard enamel-like substance called ganoin on top of a bony layer. So may ganoin ka na nga, tapos may bone ka pa. So no wonder it's very hard. The Iuliis typically have ctenoid type of scales which are thinner and more flexible. It forms concentric rings, mga ganyan, parang 3 rings, through which you can actually estimate the age of a fish. So parang 3 rings nga din sila. It has an anterior or inner half embedded and unexposed in the skin. It's the fluted side as described by Hyman, the inner fluted half. And then there's a posterior outer half, the one that's exposed, and it contains teeth, the teni. So yung may teeth na yan, yun yung actually exposed part ng scale mo. And then we move to tetrapods. The mud puppy has 2 pairs of limbs for moving on land. And instead of fins, they have these limbs na may 3 parts, divisible into 3 parts with 2 joints. So let's start with the forelimb. So the forelimb is from proximal to distal. You have the upper arm. The formal term is brachium. And then you have the forearm. Formal term is antebrachium. And then you have the manus or hand. Yung joints na nagsaseparate ay yung elbow at saka wrist or carpus. Yung hind limb naman, the proximal most part is the thigh. And then next, the shank. Formal term is crus. And then the foot or the pes. The joints are the knee and the ankle or tarsus. A unique feature of Necturus is the presence of external gills. Ito mga to, external gills, by which it can breathe underwater, but it also has lungs, not visible here. It's an internal structure to breathe on land. So it's a typical or a model amphibian. It retains certain juvenile structures like the gill slits and also the caudal fin. These are juvenile structures retained in the adult. So it's a case of neoteny. And then the skin of tetrapods is composed of an epidermis, composed of stratified epithelium and a thick dermal layer, which is composed of connective tissue, where various sensory organs and glands and blood vessels are located. The epidermis is composed of a stratum germinativum. Let's look at the high magnification. So the bottom, like the basal columnar cells ng mga to, yan yung stratum germinativum, whose function is basically to divide and proliferate to maintain the epidermis. And as the older cells get pushed upward, they are compressed and filled with a hydrophobic substance called keratin. Nagpa-flatten na sila and they fill with keratin, dying as a result. This process is called cornification. The resulting cornified cells are sometimes described in older texts as horny. This cornified upper layer of the epidermis is the stratum corneum, and it functions as a water barrier, minimizing evaporative water losses on dry land. The dermis of amphibians has a loose stratum laxum, and then a thicker and more compact stratum compactum. So nasa stratum laxum yung mga glands, yung mga cutaneous glands. And actually, mga chromatophores, mga pigment cells. Nasa stratum laxum sila. Itong medyo compact is the stratum compactum. Some type of cutaneous glands that can be observed are poison glands. Yung mga pink, usually sila yung nasa stain na glands. Yung mga poison glands, yeah. Other types of glands are mucus glands. And then the human skin shows a thicker stratum corneum layer, especially in the soles and palm. Kasi yung stratum corneum yung nagiging kalyo. Yung tinatawag natin kalyo, kumbaga. And within the dermis, more glands and structures can be found. In the scalp, there's hair follicles and sweat glands, which are coiled tubular structures. Pero since naka-cross-section ito, nakikita mo lang mga bilog-bilog na yan. Cross-section ng mga tubules na yan. These are sweat glands, which secrete sweat for thermoregulation. Near hair follicles are bands of smooth muscle that involuntarily erects hair. This is the arrector spilorum or arrector pili. In the palm, several layers of epidermis. Itong entire na to, from 1 to 3 is the epidermis. And then the basal most layer of cells in the epidermis is still the stratum germinativum. This darkly stained layer here is the stratum granulosum. At higher magnification, there's a lighter dun. May lighter layer just on top of the stratum granulosum. That's the stratum lucidum. And then the rest is composed of the dead cells ng stratum corneum. In the dermis, there's lots of sweat glands. These bumps of mga bumps na yan sa dermis projecting onto the epidermis are the dermal papillae. And then deep into the dermis, you may have seen one of these tactile organs, the Pacinian corpuscles, for deep pressure sensing, which look like onions in cross-section. So nandun sila usually sa deepest layers of the dermis. And then another type of gland seen in the scalp are the sebaceous glands, which are solid in appearance and are usually adjacent to hair follicle. They actually empty their secretions into the hair follicle and out via the pores. It secretes sebum for lubrication purposes. So these are sebaceous glands. Contrast it with the appearance of sweat glands. The functional importance of the epidermis, especially the stratum corneum, is seen in the diversity of epidermal exoskeleton seen in amniotes, which is basically tetrapods minus the amphibians. All of these are horny structures. On your screen, the horny scales covering the body of the reptiles, the horny scales on the feet of birds, the horny beak of birds, the feathers, the hair, fur of mammals, the claws, the hooves, the imbricated scales of mammals, the horns. All of these are epidermal derivatives made up of dead, flattened, and keratinous epidermal cells. We proceed with some external features of amniotes, starting with Lepidosauria, composed of two atara, a lizard here, mga lizards, kagaya ni Varanus, and also snakes, kabilang din sa Lepidosauria, if you can remember. There's still head, the trunk, and the tail. So this is a vertebrate, right? But unique. What's unique about higher, quote-unquote, higher tetrapods, the amniotes, is the presence of a neck region separating the head from the trunk. So may leeg na sila. One common, like, the function of a neck, by the way, in tetrapods is it allows greater head mobility. So advantageous siya for land animals na mahirap gumalaw because of the absence of buoyant force and pull of gravity. So it would be advantageous for a predator to move its head around even without moving the rest of the body. That's the advantage of a neck. But let's compare itong dalawang to. Magkamukha sila. And maraming nalito kung sa identification nila. One common confusion is how to distinguish tuatara from an ordinary lizard like Varanus. So tuatara is only the remaining species within its order Rhynchocephalia. It's not a lizard. The order of lizards is Squamata. The best way to ID tuatara is through examination of its skeleton, but externally, the presence of a mid-dorsal row of spines is a useful diagnostic trait. So pag nakita nyo yung mid-dorsal spine na yan, that's tuatara and not Varanus. Draco is a flying lizard, technically just a glider, but let's give it to him. It can glide using its lateral folds or patagium. It's a formal term. Many lizards like gecko also have a row of femoral pores near the thigh and the slit-like cloaca. Here, it secretes a waxy substance containing pheromones, yung femoral pores, that is, for aggressive and sexual display. Some lizards also have a single unpaired parietal eye, different from the usual visual eyes that you know. So iba yung pair of eyes na for vision and iba tong parietal eye. The parietal eye is used for non-visual photoreception that regulates circadian rhythm. So it can detect certain wavelengths of light na important for regulating body clock. The turtle shell is composed of a top carapace and a bottom plastron. The outer exposed parts of the shell are covered with horny scutes, the derivatives of epidermis. The inner sides, yung puti, are made of bony plates derived from the dermis. And then birds are covered with feathers, another derivative of the epidermis. A common challenge for anatomy students is to distinguish the different types of feathers and their anatomy. The visible feathers covering the bird, yung mga feathers na yan na nakikita ninyo externally, even without probing it deeper, are called contour feathers, which can be classified into two. There's the flight feathers, located in the wings and the tails. These are flight feathers. And then the rest, non-flight feathers na contour, are covert feathers. The flight feathers are like further classified depending on their location. So yung flight feathers of the tail are called rectrices. Flight feathers of the wings are called remiges. So to help you remember it, just remember that rectrix or rectrices contains the letter T, which is T, stands for T for tail. There are three types of remiges, flight feathers of the wings, depending kung saang part sila ng forelimb naka-attach. The distalmost remiges, yung mga to, mahaba, attached to the manus are the primaries. Proximal to it, proximal to it are the secondaries, attached to the forearm. And then the tertiaries or humerals are hidden, tucked near the armpit. So it's difficult to see. So mas nakikita lang yung secondaries and primaries. The tails of birds are reduced into tail stump, the Europygium, on top of which is an oil-secreting gland, the Europygeal gland, for preening. The cere is a colorful membrane surrounding the external nares of some birds. So it's for sometimes used for sexual display, kaya siya colorful. There's also an external ear, which is basically just a depression leading into the eardrum. This is a more detailed anatomy of some feathers. Contour feathers have a main axis. The main axis niya is called the quill. And then the embedded part, yung nakabaon dun sa skin ng bird, part of the quill is the calamus. The part bearing the barbs, the rays, is called the rachis. And then the barbs, the mga rays na yan, barbs, have finer barbules. Yung mga mas maliliit na yun. Those are the barbules. And they interlock with each other, creating a waterproof barrier. And also contributes to the aerodynamic properties of feathers. So, importante yung interlocking mechanism ng mga barbels na yun in their flight properties. The column of barbs on each side of the rachis. So, meron kang row of barbs here and a row of barbs here are called veins. There's an outer and an inner vein. The vein that's exposed when the wing is in resting position is called the outer vein or posterior vein. The vein covered by the other feathers is the inner or anterior vein. In asymmetric feathers like this primary feather here, the inner vein is usually thinner than the outer vein. So yung mas manipis is yung inner vein. And siya yung typically natatakpan ng ibang mga feathers. The phyloplume is a hair-like feather consisting of a main axis, tapos yung rays or barbs niya ay terminal in position. So there's a few terminal barbs there. So mahirap siya makita, natatabunan siya ng contour feathers. And then lastly, we examine the external features of mammalia, exemplified by carnivores. There's the head, the neck. The trunk is divided into a thoracic region and abdominal region, and then the posanal tail. The parts of the limb are as described in Nectarus. You have upper arm, forearm, manus, thigh, shank, foot, tapos merong knee, ankle, elbow, carpus or wrist. Due to the enlargement of the brain, the head has a distinct facial region, including the snout, the mouth, the eyes, and then the backside of the head, including the ears, is the cranial region. There are whiskers in the nose area, or vibrissae, which are tactile mechanoreceptive organs helping to identify nearby objects. The perineum. The perineum is basically the groin area containing the anus and the urogenital openings. The anus is posterior to the urogenital opening, which is the reverse of the teleos. Some mammals have inguinal glands in this region that secrete pheromones. So these are the types of vertebrate wings we saw in the lab. The bat and the Draco both deploy skin folds, or technically a formal term is patagium, for their flight, but their patagium are supported by different structures. In case of Draco, the wings are supported by ribs. These are ribs. In the bat, the wings are supported by bones of the forelimb, especially by the hand bones. So these are the metacarpals, the bones of your palm, and then the phalanges, the bones of the digits of the fingers. So isang malaking palad yan, isang malaking kamay yung nagsusupport sa kanyang patagium. Bird wings, on the other hand, are just modified forelimbs covered with aerodynamic feathers. So upper arm, forearm, and then manus. There's also a pair of spur there, which are modified tarsal bones. So ang function lang niya is to support the wing membrane, additional like attachment points for the wing membrane. These structures, as you know, are not homologous to each other. They are not inherited from a common ancestor. They are homoplastic, products of convergent evolution. The hoof of an ungulate has a compact horn, or unguis, and a sole horn, yung underside. Sole horn or subunguis. Mammalian horns can be classified as true or false. True horns are only found in the Bovidae, or cow family. It consists of a hollow horny sheath, so hollow yan, inside. Covering in life, it would be covering a hollow bony core, not shown here. And they never shed. In contrast, false horns, like the antlers of the Cervidae or deer family, are made of solid bone. So solid bone yung mga antlers na yan. And they are branching and projecting from the frontal bone of the skull. Antlers also shed seasonally. And this is the end of the post lab. Reminder just not to use this as a substitute for reading Hyman and other textbooks and reviewing your photos of actual specimens. Thanks to those who contributed pictures I used in this post lab.